In the first quarter of 2021, the Nigerian economy recorded, a major growth of 0.5%. That's about for GDP, while the population growth that's been hovering between 3 and 3.5, depending on the figures you want to stay with. Now, inflation rate is 18.12% in April, down slightly from a 4-year high of 18.17% in March, as unemployment and underemployment still stands over 50%, with monetary policy rates unchanged at 11.5%. Well, despite the projected growth of 1.8% in 2021, there is high uncertainty about the outlook, as the recovery will be driven by rising oil exports and in domestic demand. However, Nigeria's recovery is expected to underperform those of other oil producers, and an unexpected shock to oil prices could threaten the modest recovery projected, with the implication of insecurity challenges and, of course, food supply, effects on food supply, inflation, and foreign direct investment into the country, which, of course, will affect sustainable growth. The task ahead of government seems daunting, as microeconomic activities keep increasing day by day. But analysts are of the view that the federal government should, as a matter of urgency, concentrate on policy adjustments and reforms that will continue to arrest the decline in the economy, restore investors' confidence, and set Nigeria on a more sustainable path to recovery. Well, to discuss this and, of course, more, I have joining me live in our Lagos studios is the Chief Investment Officer at Afri Invest Assets Management Limited, Mr. Robert Omotunde. Thank you very much, Mr. Omotunde. It's good to have you in the studio.
Very much for having me. My pleasure.
Yes, I want to start on the note of these inflation figures. I think for 2 months now, we've seen a drop or a decrease, if that's the way you economists will term it. Does that really correlate with the reality on ground? Food prices are on the high side. Every other thing actually is on the high side. And the figures coming from MBS shows that there is a decrease. How do we put this together?
It's not in tandem with the reality on the ground. This is not to say that the MBS didn't report as appropriate. Of course, we are not doubting the figure that the MBS has put out there. But inflation, it's a flow variable in economics, not a stock, because it's measured on a year-on-year basis. So the last of inflation we reported was 17.91% as at May, right, which was measuring May 2021 over May 2020. So that's a year-on-year, increase. But because it's a flow variable that, is peaked on an annual basis, the impact of high level of inflation when we went as high as over 18% is still here with us, and the deceleration we are seeing is only a function of base effect. Base effect in the sense that we are coming from a very high level, in months past, and then you've gotten to a level where, the denominator is still high, on a year-on-year basis, and then is now moderating the rate of change, which is inflation in this case. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that prices are still high in the market. It's not because they've decelerated, but we have seen a mathematical moderation, if you like, in the headline inflation, And again, we cannot begin to dissect all of the factors that are responsible. The challenge with us, however, is that we're in a situation where the income of the people has not significantly improved. Some are even losing their jobs, but we are finding a situation where food prices, as a result of some of the security challenges that we face in the country, because they have not abated really. You're seeing increases in food prices, which account for over 50%, I think about 51% of the consumer price index. Is it a desirable state? No, it is not. And it is very worrying, especially when you look at the tension in the land. Insecurity has taken, different dimensions, different forms, to the extent that everybody lives in fear, even the rich, So this is not a question of whether it affects only a segment of the society. So what should they then begin to do to begin to address all of these issues, then we now speak generally to the compendium of macroeconomic issues that we have. COVID-19, before COVID-19, we've had these weaknesses. You know, our economy is so vulnerable to external shocks. You know, we're still struggling with the dip that we saw in oil prices since 2014 second half. You know, since 2014 till date, we're talking about 6 years, over 6 years, but we're still suffering from the consequences of that development, coupled with the fact that we've seen, should I say, sort of incremental budgeting from the side of the government in their efforts to also, you know, stem the tide of poverty and also, you know, put a rein on all of those vulnerabilities that we have. But what we have not seen is a significant impact on the economy. Not so because government has not spent enough, but maybe there is a need for us to begin to dimension the sort of spending that the government is doing. Is it the way to go to reflate our economy? Because let's face the fact, if unemployment is rising and inflation is rising, there's a mystery, you know, within the economy, you know, which is a puzzle that everyone needs to solve. And how do we get ourselves out of this mystery? You need to create jobs. How do you begin to create jobs? The economic indicators, or the, should I say, the business environment must be enabling to ensure that people are able to invest in the real economy and create those jobs that will lift people out of poverty. Government says over a 10-year period, they will lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty. It is achievable and it is very unachievable. It depends on the strategy that the government puts in place. If we continue the way we are going right now, I'm afraid we may not be able to achieve that. But if we will sit back, and reassess all of the issues that are confronting us, issues around subsidy, I don't know of any economy that, you know, has continuously talked about, you know, subsidy being a problem, and it's been here with us since the 70s.
It's one of those things we'll still talk about.
It's a problem.
It is.
It is a significant problem. And the earlier we get our heart together and begin to address it frontally, you know, again, it's unpopular if government says, I want to take out subsidy.
Yeah,
you know, people may say, oh, what's government doing and all of this. But the point is that, would you rather the government continue to spend to subsidize the rich or the middle class at the expense of the poor? Exactly that is what subsidy does in an economy like this, where you have more than 50% of the country living below poverty line. The poverty line defined as $1.20 per day. As we speak today, that is less than 1,000 naira. You know, so you're talking about people who are living below 1,000 naira on a daily basis. And here we talk about the, you know, skyrocketing rate of inflation, and we're not even just seeing the end in sight yet. So it's a serious problem that we need to begin to address.
Let me follow up very quickly. As of today, landing cost of PMS is about 252 or 250 something, approximately, when you add all of the rates and all of that. And at the pumps, we're still selling at 162 naira. Neighboring countries are selling fuel as much as $1 and all of this. But you know, it becomes worrisome spending this amount, and we have other challenges we could meet with all of this funding. I always like to ask this question, that I think the issue of trust comes in here. Nigerians seems not to trust the government. How can they, you know, how can they just make Nigerians believe them? How can they reactivate all of this? Because it's important that Nigerians understand what's at stake. We can't be spending over 100 billion every month to subsidize one product.
Well, I think that, I'm disappointed that we are still talking about subsidy.
Honestly, at 2021.
I think because at some point in this studio, we've analyzed when the government moved to say, oh, we are going to move to that price modulation, and then every month the government will announce, or the PPPRA will announce the new, you know, pump price. It's so surprising that we're back here again. But just to put it in context, there was a report that suggested that the landing cost, you know, of PMS, as some days back, it's about 216, and the pump price is between I think between 160 and 165, depending on where you're buying from. Now, that suggests to us that the subsidy payments on, petrol alone is between 100 and 120 billion on a monthly basis. So in a year, you're paying between 1.2, 140, 1.2 and 1.4 billion. On an annual, trillion. Trillion on an annual basis.
Trillion, yeah.
Now, that is just about, if you use the official exchange rate, that's almost $4 billion that we're using to subsidize a product that, if you dissect the consumption, I bet you that the rich or probably the middle class consume over 80% of this product. So there is no economic sense in subsidizing the rich at the expense of the poor, especially for a country of our of this type, that we have most people living below the poverty line. Now, the issue of trust, I've seen the government move in even issues that the citizens are vehemently against, but because the government is willing to do it, they have moved, and it stays that way. So why can't subsidy be like that? More so that it makes economic sense to stop the payment of subsidy, for the good of the, overall macroeconomic stability. Now, the country is broke, and that's the truth. Not just because oil prices are down, and I make bold to say that even if we double the price of oil today, if care is not taken, we're still broke, because the extent of government spending, it's not, meeting up with, should I say, the income that we generate. Look at 2021 budget. We've had another supplementary budget. We're talking about spending. The initial budget was about 13 trillion. We've added 800. That's almost $1 billion. So we're talking about approximately 14 trillion budget, and the revenue fundamentals is a far cry from what that figure is. So what happens? We continue to borrow, and to what extent, are we going to get? There's practically no infrastructure that we fix in this country that is not through borrowing. So something is fundamentally wrong. We can't use all our revenue for recurrent, and then if we must fix capital project, it must come through borrowing. Then when are we ever going to be able to repay those debts? So the thinking for the government is, in fact, this should be the list of worries for government. Government should be able to convince the citizens that we may agree with you on other things that you feel strongly about, but this is about our economic conviction. If we must take this economy out of the woods, this is the right way for us to go. We can't continue to subsidize petroleum products. We can't continue to subsidize electricity. I don't know of any country in the world where, any country that is progressive, where that is, being done. So the point now is that even if we want to do it, if there is a will from the side of government to subsidize, we can't afford to subsidize, except you're not going to pay salaries, you're not going to, run government, you're not going to build infrastructure. And then if that is what we want as a country, definitely that's not the path to go. So it should be easier for the government to convince the people that we are going to do away with subsidy, and show, lead from the front. Whatever the government needs to do, maybe in terms of cutting, some of the recurrent, expenditure, over bloated salaries, if there are cases like that, you can lead from the front by saying, okay, for this reason, we're, showing signals, but we must do away with subsidy. We can't continue to pay subsidy and we expect the economy to move forward. It's very unproductive. It's not, think about it. They are all consumption, electricity, pump price. There is no country that subsidizes consumption and, witness, significant growth in its economy. So we have to learn, if we must subsidize anything, it must be to the productive sector of the economy, right? We cannot continue to subsidize people, funding their consumption pattern. It's not done.
It won't work.
And it will not work. So definitely we need to be able to, government must take that initiative to be able to convince the citizens, to let them understand that this is what is good for them. But this is a problem that we've had for decades. From the last count, over 40 decades, going to 50 decades, we've been talking about subsidy, and governments have found it very difficult to get this done. Indeed, a government that will come and do this, once and for all, will get a thumbs up, in terms of the economic improvement that we're going to see.
That is what many find very difficult to believe. They still believe that they will just pay more for PMS. And now let's move to the report from also World Bank and IMF. I looked critically at this report, and we even had the World Bank country director early in the week to speak more about it. There were some commendations for Nigeria, like some critical steps to address issues around poverty, for the recession, and even commending the central bank for the adoption of the I&E window, but still want more to be done. What's your overview of what's been said by the IMF and World Bank? Some of the projections to me look more like a tall order.
Well, I think that, for any country in our situation, if you look at any of the, Bretton Woods institution, what they want to ensure is that the fundamental principles of market system is embraced in the running of your economy. And if you look at some of the issues we've had, especially since 2014, especially around our foreign exchange, it's been, different efforts to ensure that we stabilize our currency. And that effort has, resulted in, what looks like, fighting the market. And from the economic standpoint, it's very difficult to fight the market, because when you fight the market hits back.
Okay. Yeah.
We know where we have found ourselves in terms of exchange rate. Definitely, it's not the desired state for the central bank or even the government, but that is where we have found ourselves. Perhaps we'll have been able to manage this better if we embrace the market principle, even for exchange rate management. But we've seen a lot of demand side controls, from the part of the central bank. We've seen, also different efforts to ensure that as much as the central bank is trying to stabilize, they also don't affect the overall well-being of the economy. And they have done that consistently. They are committed to doing that, But the point is that we have not really seen, maybe because we are confronted with a lot of problems, left, right, and center, not just effects of COVID-19, pandemic, but because of all our, other internal issues that we have to face. But definitely, the point when we move to a full-fledged market-reflective exchange rate, that is when we'll begin to take the bull by the horn. And we say, even if our exchange rates, is a bit volatile to the upside in a short term, the market system just find a way to equilibrate prices and bring it down to, the point where it's fair for both the buyers and the sellers. And I think that's the fundamental point that the World Bank or the IMF will be trying to emphasize. Today we have official exchange rate at the I&E at about 411 or thereabouts. Meanwhile, in the parallel market, we have it as high as almost 500. So look at that gap between the official window and the parallel market. So definitely there is something going on, why we don't have that much balance. There was a point between 2017 till late, or should I say early 2020, we had that equilibrium between the parallel market and the official window. It stayed at 360 for a very long time, both on the street in the parallel market and on the I&E FX window. But between then and now, we've seen some shocks in terms of supplying the system, and that has also impacted on the general state of that market. So there's this sort of imbalance now. People want to exit, but are not able to get some dollars. Of course, again, because the flows from the central bank's angle has also reduced somewhat. So the point we are making here is that, yes, we'll begin to clamor for the point when we now have full-fledged market principles determining our exchange rate. But until that point, I guess we still need to cope with some of the, measures that are put in place by the central bank to ensure the stability of foreign exchange. And I think that's the best we can have for now.
It's always interesting talking to you, and time is always fast spent. Look at just imagine we've not been able to address all the issues. But before we wrap up, what policy options do you now see that can help us address some of these challenges, and what are your projections for growth? Let's talk about GDP now.
For policy options, it's a difficult one because we're in a crisis state. When you are in a crisis state, it's difficult to, when you have issues and there is a shock, it's even difficult to think.
There was really a time central bank went away from conventional policies.
That's still where we are.
That's still where we are.
Yeah, the central bank will say it's heterodox.
Exactly, heterodox money policy.
That's what they are adopting. And I say because we are in a crisis state. However, as we're doing that, we also need think tanks that will begin to, think about what is more lasting, sustainable, what will be long lasting that will leave a long lasting impact on the economy, and this is about embracing the market principles in every sphere of our life. If we can do that, think about it. Why do we call developed economies market economies? We call them market economies. Some of us say, they are capitalist economy, but they prosper. They prosper, those who can who have initiative to build businesses. But the good thing about that is that they also employ people, and the rate of poverty, the so-called market economies, where you say, they are bourgeoisies because a lot of capitalists exist in there. The truth is that impact is also felt on the economy. Imagine we have 1 million of a Dangote in Nigeria. What impact will they have in terms of job creation? And that is the model we need to begin to think about. The more we move towards a full-fledged, market-determined economy, the better we begin to think about a sustainable growth for this country that even generations yet unborn will benefit from.
Well, it's a good way to leave it. Chief Investment Officer, AfriInvest Asset Management Limited, Mr. Robert Omo today. Thank you very much for dropping by the studio today to speak on these very important issues. Hope to have you again shortly.
Thank you for
all right then. Thank you.